Shinshiv, Smisha Gaelic Machgerish. I'm Gaelic and I'm your Scottish Gaelic speech coach, and I'm very excited about this video. This is the first of 3 very important videos that I'm making, which I'm calling the Keys to Scottish Gaelic. I've decided that there are 3 key elements to learning this language that you need to have at the forefront of your mind. And this one, number 1, is the most important. Basically, I can summarize it up in one word: sound. And in terms of Gaelic sound, the prime thing that we have to realize is that it is very different from English. The overarching concept that I want you to take away from this is that the sound system of Gaelic and h-Alba is different from English in almost every single way. So rather than boring you with a list of things, what I'd like to do is to give you a demonstration of the differences between the 2 languages. And the way I'm going to do this is by using a piece of poetry. And don't worry if you don't like poetry, because you don't have to like poetry. This is really for you to get a flavour of the Gaelic language. The poem I'm going to use is by a very famous Gaelic poet called Sorley MacLean. Sorley MacLean. He came to the fore last century and basically brought the Gaelic language in terms of poetry crashing into the 20th century. And for my mind, I think he penned one of the best love poems ever written in any language. And it's called Con is Matianali, Dogs and Wolves. And one of the reasons I love it is because it's very straightforward. The poem is kind of fast and frantic, and it contains just 2 metaphors, 2 important metaphors. One is terrifying and ugly, and the other is at the other extreme. It's almost painfully beautiful and lovely. And so he really loved the sound of Gaelic. And it was something that he really revelled in. And if you listen to him, I was going to say reciting, but it'd probably be better to say performing his own poetry. You can really feel that. So that's one of the reasons I chose this poem. And a lot of the sounds that are in Gaelic are in this poem. So it's really kind of like a microcosm of the entire language. And the other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to read my own translation, which I just completed recently for Valentine's Day, as it happens, just so that you can compare the 2 languages. And I've had help from a very highly esteemed colleague who happens to specialise in translation to make sure that my translation is as faithful as possible to the Gaelic while actually having an English life as a poem. So, without further ado, I'm going to read both of these. I've kind of turned things up to 11 as much as I can in terms of each poem. And I've done that for a very important reason that I will explain later. Conius Matianali, Dan Doevid, Fichits Anoi, Le Sorley MacLean. Har na siariach carasneachke, hi mi magan jo jachtje, hi mi lorgan a spoke, bdechke, gile hoer nach een drechke. Calach edd volle, tjenke falle, gagad chulas Matianali, a leem haar mullich in a garig, ruif a skal na gruven fasel, a gal koong na gug lewn, a shide kashet na gug vewn, a langan galanach a shianal, haar lummen krua in an aun gianal, een korstig vivuan am a chluasen, en jaun rich a gal ma vuagen, Reish na matugs na con iergalt, lua torach gyniergig, tron a keiltjen gynierg, haar mullich na biaun gynhierig, con húne kuich na barstach, Matian tod na haliach, haliach gan anamas an utin, fiug gjal haar viaun as röntjen, fiug de voiche kúne gulig, fiugach gan skur. Genoeg. Dogs and Wolves, Poems for Emmer, number 29, by Sorley MacLean. Across the snows of eternity, I see my undictated poems. I see their tracks darkly speckling the snow's serene whiteness. Hackles roused, bloody-tongued, scrawny hounds and wolves, leaping the full height of stone dykes, bolting through the shadows of the wasteland's trees, making for the confines of the narrow glens, favouring the steepness of windswept peaks, their audacious howling screaming out over the hard barrenness of awful times, their relentless baying filling my ears, their headlong rush gripping my senses, the hurtling forth of hounds and terrible dogs, making haste to find their prey, through the forests without veering, over mountain summits unswerving, the gentle, mad dogs of poetry, wolves in pursuit of beauty, a beauty of spirit and countenance, a white deer over mountain and plain, the deer of your graceful beloved beauty, an endless hunt without respite. So there you go. Let me know in the comments what you think about the poem Con is Mati and Aldi and my English translation as well. What I'd like you to do is to have a listen again. And if you haven't turned on the subtitles, I'd like you to do that so that you can read along. And you can pause as much as you want and see if you can find anything in the Gaelic poem that you can compare to English in terms of the sounds and the way that the sounds are made and represented with the Latin Roman alphabet that we use for both English and Gaelic. You can do the same for the English. When you're listening and reading the English, is there anything there that you think you can maybe transpose from English to Gaelic? Any letters even that ring true in both languages? And what I am trying to bring home very clearly in this video is that there is almost nothing. That the two languages, in terms of their sound system, really have to be regarded as two separate worlds. And I've stolen a metaphor in a way. I was thinking about the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And it came to me that English is Jupiter and Gaelic is Mercury. And I think that works quite well as a metaphor because they're very far apart and they're very different. They're in the same solar system in here, but they are just discrete from one another. And it works as a metaphor because, I don't know, if you go out at night, here in Skye, certainly, on a moonless night and look up, the first thing you will see is Jupiter. It's the most apparent thing in the sky. It's so bright. And English is like that. It's so apparent. You don't really have to look for English anywhere. Very few places in the world where you will struggle to find it represented somehow. And Mercury, on the other hand, is the opposite. If you want to see Mercury, you have to know exactly where to go and when to go there. You have to get just a very short time before sunrise or a short time after sunset. And you have to be ready to spot Mercury in the right place. And Gaelic is the same. It is something that we kind of have to actively look for in terms of finding people to speak it with as a minority language. And of course, I think both of these objects in the universe have their own specific beauty and points of interest. And for me, English and Gaelic are the same. And I hope listening to the two versions, to the Gaelic poem, Cognac Matting Ali, and my English translation of it, I hope you might agree with that in that context as well. What makes this tricky and what makes Gaelic challenging is that we are not only representing different sounds with the same alphabet that you're used to, we're also representing a great deal more sounds than English. English is relatively poor in terms of phonetics, the richness of its sounds compared to Gaelic. So this is a big challenge for learners, and I think it's one of the things that holds people back. I don't think Gaelic is especially difficult grammatically than your average European language. So, lots of different sounds, and everything is different. You might think some of the letters are the same, but they're not. They're all subtly different. The combinations of words are completely different from English. The words themselves all sound different. I'll give you some nice examples soon, just to illustrate that. The way phrases and sentences sound, the way they run together, is different from English too. And I thought about this carefully. If we were to make two kind of like a Venn diagram, the only intersection that I could think of in terms of where you can find a sound that is consistently the same in both languages, the only thing I could find was the pairing PH. So, for example, philosophy and mofure. That's the only example I could find. And so that's your lot. So you might as well just face facts. We're just starting from scratch. This, I suspect, for some people will be quite a humbling thing to realise. That in order to learn Gaelic authentically, you have to basically go back to the drawing board in terms of recognising letters and sounds and combinations and putting them together. So we're going back to our ABC, as it were. Except this time we're going back to A, B, K. All the sounds are new and have to be learned deliberately if you are to have an authentic Gaelic voice. And there are so many other little things too, which I won't go into too much detail here. But for example, the letter H is like a special character that's doing its own thing. It's like a tool, really, rather than a specific letter in its own right. No actual Gaelic words begin with H, for example, but we use H constantly as a modifier to change the sound of consonants by turning them into totally different sounds. We call this lenition, and I'll use that word because it's in common use in Gaelic education. But basically, we can think of it as adding an H, and very often you can think of it as the softening of the sounds as well. Another example, I gave you mofure a wee while ago. That's an example of lenition, and another would be movrahed, where the sound of B here is changed to a V sound. Lenition. The letter H is also used with vowels in order to give a breath. And we call this an aspirant. So you'll meet that as well, and we can talk about that too. That is something that never happens in English, where we bolt on the letter H to the beginning of a word, as far as I can think. If there is an example, tell me in the comments. Now, I'm coming to the most important part of this key to Gaelic, I think. And it's when we talk about vowel sounds. The vowels in Gaelic. We have the same, the letters look the same, but they are so different. In so many ways, it's almost, you can't overemphasize how different they are. And the most important kind of fact within that is that we have very short and very long vowels in Gaelic. And there is a big contrast between the two. And I hope if you maybe go back to Cognas Mathianal, you will hear that very distinctly. I've done my very best to do that in that poem without going too far overboard. I might be pushing the boundaries a little bit, but it is to get you to become aware of this key difference. And I say to students, the most important single change that you can make to your Gaelic to improve it is to increase the polarization between the very short vowels in Gaelic and the very long vowels in Gaelic. And this is something that takes a lot of deliberate practice, and I don't think people generally realise how much work this takes. And of course, most of you will know that we divide Gaelic vowels into two specific categories. We have the slender vowels, e, agus I, and we have the broad vowels, a, agus o, agus u. Now these categories are really important for learners from the beginning to get to grips with, because the vowels are basically running the show in Gaelic. In English, I think the vowels and consonants seem to they're on the stage together, they're all doing their own thing. Sometimes one is at the front, sometimes one is at the... But in Gaelic, really the vowels are the stars of the show, and they basically boss all the other sounds around. And we have to really tune into that when we're learning. And we categorise the vowels as slender and broad because they change the sound of everything else in different ways. So the effect that the slender vowels have on consonants and combinations is different from the effect that the broad vowels have on consonants and combinations when they meet in words. And I will give you some examples of that as well in a moment. So these are the things that have to be internalized from the very beginning. Just everything is so different. And if you're looking for things to connect Gaelic to English, it's never going to end well. And this is our kind of instinct, I think. We want a lifeline. We want something to cling on to and to say, oh, good, this Gaelic word sounds exactly like this English word. I'm sorry to break it to you folks, but it doesn't. And I know it's a very common thing to teach Gaelic in this way, but it doesn't work. And I will be drawing attention to that a lot in some of my videos and some shorts that I hope to make as well, to make internalizing this very important fact fun for learners. So, I think I'm probably whittering on too much here, and what we need is actual demonstrations to actually show you what I'm talking about here. So I thought I'd have a bit of fun just demoing some different words in Gaelic to show you how different, just using individual words at the moment to show you how different Gaelic is from English. The poem, Con is Matti and Ali. The first word of the title is the one I'm going to choose first, and it's a really good word, because what I'm going to do here is contrast words that mean something in English. And of course, this first word means something in English, but it also means something in French as well. So, I'd like to have a look at this combination of letters in French, in English, and en Gaelic. So, comment le dit-on C-O-I-N en français? C'est très facile, non? Coin. Très bien. Coin. Coin. Vous comprenez? Coin. Il y en a 4 dans cette pièce. Coin. And now, what about the King's English? How does one say these letters in English? C-O-I-N. That's right, coin. Haha, coin. A little disc you can exchange for goods and services. I could buy an ice cream or a newspaper, or I could pay a little fellow to park my Bentley around the back of the club. Ha ha ha! Coin. Jamie Ian ounce Gaelic English. Kimmer haukera k o I n. Wel keinakov? By ounce of arstoch. Neskira. Neskira. Shine. Coin. Coin. This word that looks the same in 3 languages. We call these false friends. But you will come across lots of these in Gaelic. But there you have coin, coin, and coin. And the key thing I want you to see, French, very distinct. English, it has its own flavour. But the Gaelic word, because the vowels here are short, is the shortest of the 3. Coin, coin, coin. And this is, you will find throughout the language. If they are not long vowels, they are really short. Okay? Now, of course, we're more attuned, I suppose, to the long vowels in Gaelic because they generally have a marker, what we call a grave accent. So, maybe we could go up to Scotland to have a look at this one. How do you say L-A-I-R? I've got a bit Billy Connolly here. How do you say L-A-I-R in English if you're in Scotland? That's right, it's lair, like the dragon's lair. Except on telly, it's a dragon's den. Now, what's going on there? A dragon's den? It's a dragon's lair. And you can hear it's got a bit of a slidey vowel in it. Lair. But what about Gaelic? Jamie in a Gaelic. Ha fisak in gyfele fata. Ach, cymmer a haw gra ul a fata I awn sa Gaelic. Sinne. Lad. Lad. She echbor on the hound. Lad. Amongst other things, this word in Gaelic means a female horse. And there's, again, I'm talking about how vastly different Gaelic is. Every part of this word, lad, is different from the word lair, whether you're up in Scotland or anywhere else. The other thing I want you to be aware of here, and this is it's only recently that I've really dawned on me how difficult this is for learners. The vowel sound that's dominating here is the ah, the open ah sound. And the E is a bit more subtle. And remember, this letter is E. The E is basically modifying, bossing around the R at the end and changing it from the basic, in the alphabet, R is R, R. But here it is th, which is a very tricky sound. And I know some of you have asked about it in the comments. And here is an example of it ahead of obviously I will be doing a more comprehensive video on the letter R. And this is a very tricky sound. And I often hear people saying liar and sliding into the R sound. We don't do that. And we have to learn this very, very deliberately with lots of practice as lad. I will give you lots of tips on how to do that R at the end, but just you've got a chance to hear it there. Another thing that people are learning Gaelic, it's not emphasised enough and it's definitely not practised enough. There are a few long vowels in Gaelic that are not marked by the accent. And these, the best example of this is in the following English word. And now I'm going to go over to America and I'm going to use my radio voice to ask you, how do you say this word? G-A-O-L. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourselves, that's not a word. Well, trust me, it is. Those crazy guys across the pond sometimes still use this word. Do you know how to sound it? That's right, it's jail. Who'd have thought it? Jail. Ounce of Gaelic. Cimara hashin y gra shin. G, a, o, l. Girl. 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 Now this is the one that I hear mispronounced more often than not. And there are various reasons for that. And one of them is what I've just pointed out. We have two letters representing one sound. And it's a tricky sound because it's not in English at all. It's a kind of unusual sound. It's right at the back and it's closed. And you have to kind of channel the Joker when you're saying, when you're practicing it. Because the temptation always is to turn it into a round vowel, ooh, up here. That's not it. That's a different vowel altogether. And I know that's a crazy kind of contrast. Jail and girl. And for these of you thinking, is it really a word? It is. Think of Oscar Wilde's The Ballad of Reading Gaol. The contrast isn't always this huge, but every word like this that has an English version and a Gaelic version, they're always radically different. Although maybe not quite this radically different. Jail, girl. But this, I have to emphasize this sound is the one that is most resistant to acquiring well and consistently in Gaelic. So it needs, possibly of all the vowels, it needs the most deliberate, regular, consistent practice. Not only that, we have the accented vowels, which have to be practiced long. We have a few long vowels that are represented by more than one letter. And we also have a curious thing that happens in Gaelic where we get long vowel sounds from double letters. And I introduced you to one of them in my taster coaching session with I'm Learning Gaelic. Hamigiu sachu Gaelic. So that I-O-N-N is basically a vowel sound. Ew. And it's very, very slidey. Ew sachu. So, how about we go over to Canada, eh? How do you say this here word here? B-A-L-L. That's right. Ball. Ball. We kind of prefer hockey pucks around here, but, we'll kick a ball around sometimes. And, Canadians, we like to tease each other and just have a good time. And we just have a ball. But how? I'm not quite sure about the Gaelic. How would you say that in Gaelic now? Íshiv go. Cimara hashiv gra sho. Ounce of Gaelic. B. A. O. Ol. Bowl. 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 So when you think about that, listen to that, and you hear that sound. Basically, we're getting a very long, slidey vowel. The fancy word is a diphthong, which I may use, because it kind of makes sense. You can hear the two at the beginning, die, thong, diphthong, the kind of two sounds. Bowl. And this, for all little words in Gaelic that have two letters, this is very much the case. And, as you met with even longer words sometimes, very often, ew sachuch, ew sachuch. This is the case as well. And some of you may be thinking, I've been learning Gaelic for quite a while. Nobody's ever really emphasized this before. Kind of vague idea with some of the words, but... So, this is really just a taster of the sound system of Gaelic. Just to give you a flavour of the massive contrast that you are going to be facing, especially with words like this that you've been familiar with all your life. A is for apple, B is for ball. a chan an Gaelic. Chanel sin cearst. Ha b son bawl. B son bawl. And I mentioned earlier on about the poem that I read. Conyas math the anali. Le son le machgalein. And I said that I was kind of turning things up to 11. And I'm going to come back to this in future videos. But just to point it out here, that when you are practicing Gaelic, that is what I want you to do. I want you to turn things up to 11. And I want you to practice your Gaelic like Sor le Machgalein, reading a poem. Because I think I'm becoming more and more convinced that this is the route to getting an authentic, convincing Gaelic voice. And especially when it comes to the long and the short. The long and the short of it is, you have to focus on the long and the short above all the other things that I've mentioned. All the little things. There'll be other little intricacies and things that I will have to draw attention to in order to get really proficient. But this is the key thing. That when you're practicing, you make the long vowels long. Girl, girl. And you focus on making the short vowels short. Con, con. And the deliberate practice that is needed to reinforce and to make that second nature is not to be underestimated. But I'm here to help you do that and to learn and to be very confident with all the combinations and all little additional things that will make your Gaelic sound spot on. So that is it for the first key to learning Gaelic. Yuchad a hun, the sound of the language. Now, I will be producing 2 other videos on 2 more very important keys that you need to hold in your mind whenever you're practicing, whenever you're speaking, whenever you're reading Gaelic. But this one is the most important. So I'd like to hear in the comments any thoughts that you have. Hopefully by the time you've listened to keys number 2 and 3, everything that you need will be there. And then you can approach all of the work that I'm going to put out in terms of all of the letters, all the combinations, how words sound, how phrases go together, how a coherent, flowing, authentic Gaelic sentence is put together. And the other thing I'll say as well, I was using different accents, partly for a laugh, but also to highlight what many of you have mentioned in the comments, the variety of accents and dialects that we have in Gaelic. And I would say that all of the English, the English of Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, America, Canada, Gaelic is arguably as diverse between the Isle of Lewis and the Isle of Barra and Islay, Sutherland, the Isle of Skye. But what I hope to do through this channel is to give you a doorway into learning a particular dialect of the language. If you learn to speak English clearly, you can be understood by everyone wherever you go. And the same, I will teach you to speak as best as I can a Gaelic that will be understood everywhere. And also, I will open the door for you to be able to acquire the language. So, for example, if you have a grandmother in Lewis and you want to engage with that particular flavour of the language, you can do that. If you have relatives in the Isle of Barra or in Islay, you will have the resources here to acquire whatever flavour of the language that you like. But there's a lot of work to be done, as I say, literally from the letters themselves up. And that is what I hope to make engaging and fun through these videos. So thank you for listening. This is definitely the longest of the 3 keys. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Tap live agus mar sin live an drasta.